Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Now, yesterday we talked a little bit about Auburn football, about their game coming up this weekend against Mercer. And today we've, of course, got to follow that up with a preview of Alabama's first game as well on Saturday. That game is at 6:30 on Saturday against Utah State. Today, I'm joined by our Alabama writer, Michael Casagrande. Michael, there's a lot to break down here. I know people are really excited about this. We feel like we've been waiting a very long time for football season. It's finally here. I think some people were maybe a little disappointed that Utah State was the first game. So tell me what fans can expect on Saturday night and what we can expect from Utah State.
Yeah, no, it's kind of the new scheduling format that they moved to this year. It's been on the books for a couple of years that it's kind of replacing the Atlanta, Arlington, Dallas type games where they've been doing the neutral site games almost every year since 2008. Took 2 years off of that, but the home and home, I think it'll benefit fans more in the long run when they'll have a major Power Five conference team at home every year, as opposed to having to go to Atlanta, going to Texas again, to kind of these NFL stadiums, have more of a real college atmosphere, more value for people with buying season tickets. So Texas will be here next year for the second week of the season. So it's going to be a change in the way things kind of the format of things, but I think overall it's a benefit. But yeah, I mean, Utah State's a team that's not a terrible team, not as bad as some of the other non-conference teams that come in here. A year ago, they beat Oregon State. They were the Mountain West Conference champions. Not a bad conference, not a power conference, but probably right there at that next tier. Lost a lot of guys, lost a lot of their offense. They didn't look great a week ago against UConn, one of the worst teams in college football. So I think I was trying to convince myself this was going to be some way interesting or weird, but I think it's they do have an interesting offense. They did put up 500 plus yards, but it's not a team that you don't really expect Alabama to come out of this game with too much damage.
You don't expect it, but doesn't Saban always say you can't be overconfident here? I know that's something that we were talking about yesterday with Auburn, is that Auburn should beat Mercer this weekend, but nothing is guaranteed in college football. I think that's what kind of makes it fun, what people like about it. Now, again, that game is 6:30. Alabama's coming out of last season, and I know a lot of people have referred to last season as a rebuilding year for the Crimson Tide. Tell me a little bit about that and what's going to be different or what's expected to be different this season than last season.
I mean, that was a Nick Saban talking point, calling it a rebuilding season, and it kind of caught fire a month or so ago about just, before practices started, in the vacuum of information of excitement building. But it's just, I mean, it's a relative term. It's kind of thing where for any other program that would have been, for any other than like 5 programs, that would have been one of the best seasons in program history. So it's a relative thing. I think it's a motivational thing. He's sending messages to his team, just like every time he speaks in public, there's some sort of message he's reiterating to the players that he had already said in the locker room. So it's just another one of those things where rebuilding would be a stretch for most people outside of Alabama football to call it 13-2 national championship runner-up, leading in the fourth quarter of rebuilding season. So it is what it is, as he likes to say.
Well, and again, we know that this year, coming into some new players this year, tell me, I know you've written a lot in the last couple of days about some very technical things going on the field. Tell me about the punting expectations here coming into this season, and also about the offensive line expectations.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of new guys. Tyler Steen's one of the 5 Power 5 conference transfers. He came from Vanderbilt, starting at left tackle. 4 of the 5 guys who transferred, the major transfers, are either starters or co-starters. Tyler Harrell from Louisville, the receiver, is the only one who's not a top line depth chart player. But yeah, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is the one that has get the most attention at running back, coming from Georgia Tech, stepping into the number 1 running back role. It's been a pretty big responsibility over the years, from the Mark Ingrams, Trent Richardson's, Najee Harris recently, Brian Robinson last year. It's a pretty big role. It's historically been a launching pad for running backs into bigger things. So he's going to have a lot of burden on his back, but he's got some depth behind him. And Jace McClellan, Roydell Williams, both of whom came off ACL injuries a year ago. So they're back at 100%. Saban feels good about them, and Trey Sanders behind him. So there's depth at running back. And the other main probably transfer is Jermaine Burton coming from Georgia at receiver. Probably one of the more interesting moves, being that he came, I think, 2 weeks after the national championship game in which he won and beat Alabama, and then comes over from Georgia to Alabama about 2 weeks later. So he's been the most consistent receiver in the preseason from what Nick Saban said. So plenty of new faces, true freshmen, 10 true freshmen in the depth chart, 2 at starters, Jaheim Otis, defensive line, and Kobe Prentice of Calera at receiver. So there's going to be a lot of new faces, some new things to get used to this year for sure.
Well, not only are there some new faces, again, you mentioned those 10 true freshmen there, but what about these players that are coming from other programs? What about the kind of culture shift there? What about adjusting to a new team and adjusting to Coach Saban?
Yeah, it's something that Nick Saban had talked about, that it sometimes takes a little bit of an adjustment coming to a program like this where there are different expectations as opposed to where they were before. Vanderbilt, different expectations, different level of play. They're in the SEC, but it's a whole different planet compared to coming to Tuscaloosa. So there's a little bit of that. I'm sure Jermaine Burton coming from Georgia, a very similar program, is going to have a less of a culture shock coming to Tuscaloosa to Alabama. So I think he'll be just fine. But most of them have had time to adjust. Steen, Harrell, they both came over the summer. The other guys were here for spring practice. So it all seems to work out in the end. Either they've got it or they don't.
What about injuries? I know you mentioned several players that are coming off some serious ACL tears there, getting back in the game. Who is out of the game right now for injuries, and who are we kind of undecided about right now?
The biggest name is Cameron Latou, the starting tight end, the top receiving yards returning from a year ago. He's out. He had a minor knee injury just before preseason practice. He's supposedly back in practice and working back towards getting into games moving forward. JoJo Earl, receiver, he had a Jones fracture in his foot a few weeks ago, sophomore receiver. He'll be out for a few more weeks, but overall, nothing too major coming out of preseason.
Well, and I know that is good for Crimson Tides, good for Nick Saban and for fans there. Now, Michael, I have to ask you something. I asked New Bias, one of our Auburn beat reporters, yesterday, and that was, what do you expect, or what are you most looking for when you step into that stadium on Saturday when you are watching this first game? I know New Bias said that he was most looking at TJ Finley there. Now, probably not the same thing, probably not the quarterback that you are looking at on this game, but what exactly are you looking at? What's the first thing you're taking notes on?
Yeah, I mean, the Gibbs at running back, curious to see his explosive speed that we've heard about coming out of the backfield as a receiver. He can catch the ball. Bill O'Brien showed he liked to do that a year ago. The receiver, it's the new guys who are the new pieces, how they're going to fit in. You know what Bryce Young can do. You're curious what the Jermaine Burton, what's he going to be able to do at receiver. Cornerback is a position where there's been a lot of competition, ongoing competition with 4 guys listed on 2 starting spots. So see how that shakes out. It's an ongoing competition there. And that's always, it's a position that Nick Saban coaches closer than any other position on the field. So it's going to be one that there's a lot of pressure for those guys. But then, in practice being such a big part of it. So, and Utah State likes to throw the ball, so they'll be tested, which is big because Texas, a week later, you have one of the better young quarterbacks in the country that they'll be facing in Austin. So, not a whole lot of time. There's a little bit, more of a grace period with this game with Utah State to feel some things out before heading into Texas. But those are the positions. Offensive line, it's not the sexy position. You're not going to watch it as closely during the game, but you'll be able to see if guys are getting to Bryce Young and if there are holes for the running backs to get through. So that was probably the biggest need to adjust after last season, where it didn't go. Offensive line took a definite step back.
What are going to be some of the games that Alabama you think is going to have the hardest time with this year, or is going to be facing the hardest teams this year?
They have some of their bigger games at home with Texas A&M coming off of the loss last year. That's going to be in Bryant-Denny, October 8th. Auburn is at Alabama this year. The Arkansas is a sneaky, interesting game. The way they've kind of risen up last year, that they're uh, could be a contender in the West this year. Ole Miss is on the road at the end of the season, towards the end of the season. So, um, anytime you go on the road, it's going to add a little bit of that flavor. Ole Miss will have some time to get new quarterbacks, new people adjusted to the Lane Kiffin offense. So, if you remember 2 years ago, the last time they went to Oxford, it was a shootout, a bloodbath of all proportions for both sides of the ball. Both defenses were a mess that day. So anytime you go there, anytime Lane Kiffin's involved, you never know. So I think those are the games that would be the most interesting.
Are those the ones that you're looking forward to covering the most?
Definitely. In Tennessee, you never know what Tennessee this year, that they've got some momentum in the preseason, and that's on the road again. So Alabama hasn't lost to them since 2006. So I know that streak is weighing heavily on them, and having a home game, if they were to come out of the gate with some momentum, you never know what can happen there.
I don't think I need to remind anybody of this, but again, first game there for Alabama and for Auburn for a lot of our SEC schools here on Saturday. Again, that game, Alabama, is at 6:30 p.m. against Utah State. Michael, I know you're going to keep us updated on AL.com, and I know that everybody can get the latest information all week there as well. Everybody watching, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for coming and breaking this down a little bit and helping people get kind of excited ahead of Saturday. So again, everybody,
it's exciting time of year.
hey, I can hear it from you. Thank you, Michael. Everybody watching, thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.